AMP Studios, brought to you by Old Mutual.
Awesome honor to have you here. You're a guy that even like, I don't know, in my early days of releasing music, your name was out there. It was synonymous as being one of the legends in radio. So to have met you and then have engaged with you was really cool. And I know you've got ridiculous insight. So I'm looking forward to getting that knowledge out of you today.
Thanks for that. I mean, at the end of this year will be 40 years in radio, and I've gone from LPs and 7 singles through to DAT, through to CDs, and now digital. So I've pretty much seen it all in the 40 years. But I mean, the changes we're seeing now are quite radical.
I mean, obviously, I think I met you when you were at Jacaranda. And then obviously you went back to Kaya. But could you possibly just for the people watching, just give a brief sort of history of your background in radio?
Well, I got my first job in radio as a technical operator at 702 in 1980. They'd been on air for about 5 months, and I was phoning around trying to find work in radio because I knew that I couldn't get in it because everyone wanted to be the DJ, the jock. But I knew I wouldn't get a position on air, so I knew bit about technical, so I thought I'd get through the side door. And so I joined 702 as a technical operator, learning the operations of studios, editing, sound engineering, etc. And about a year later, I managed to get on air at 702. And I was there for quite a while, till 1989. Then after that, I joined 5FM. And while I was at 5, I did mostly weekends, but I was fortunate enough to do a TV show called the Toyota Top 20 with Lawrence Dube. And at that stage, the SABC were in flux, post-apartheid, pre-new dispensation. Right. And so there was really no control at the SABC. You could do what the hell you wanted on radio and TV. And we took this Top 20 show and kind of turned it into a hip-hop, rap kind of non-chart show, which was incredibly fascinating for me because these markets were changing. Absolutely, from the R&B thing, the Bobby Brown, into the more LL Cool J, Public Enemy, Wu-Tang Clan stuff. And although it may not have been as big then as it is now, I mean, hip hop is just a phenomenon, like a cornerstone of culture now. It was really interesting to be there, and also all the exiles were coming back. So you got to meet, Kaifa Semenya and Letta Mbulu, and you got to meet Abdullah Ibrahim and Hugh Masekela and Jonas Gwangwa. And it was just fantastic. I mean, you were just this youngster being surrounded by historical change, like going on, and you were kind of at the center of it in terms of music. Then after that, being on air is kind of a strange thing because you've got to give yourself kind of a time limit. Like if you're not in the top 10 shows or earners by a certain time, definitely draw a line in the sand. And I knew within the first 10 years of my career that wasn't going to happen. So I'd always been interested in music. And at 702, in the early days, I was involved in music research, trying to find out what people wanted to listen to, how they wanted to listen to it. And then scheduling software like came along, the computerized stuff. I was interested in that. So I became a music manager and managed music and did music strategy and music research. And that's how I got into the management of things. So after that, I worked down in Cape Town at a thing called Peace Radio, which is kind of a precursor to the first elections. It was done on Radio 2000 that supported kind of initiatives around peace and reconciliation kind of programming, which is really interesting to do as well. Yeah. And then following that, I worked at P4, which is Heart in Cape Town now.
Right.
And then at Kaya, Jacaranda. So I haven't been around at many stations in the period I've been in radio. But I think, looking at the places I've been, there have always been interesting markets and interesting changes. I've always been involved in either a startup or a mess up, like either you're starting something or you're going in to fix something or change something. Right. So it's been an interesting time.
I mean, I suppose P4 is early days of Heart, which must have been fascinating because there are a lot of people who would be who would be looked at as legends of Cape Town radio. Every now and then you see these pictures on Facebook or social media of like, these guys from like, I don't know, the mid 90s or whatever. You're like, what? It's so cool. But I think also, if I think about the fact that, you went from a Heart to, let's say, a Kaya, which I suppose to some degree I always looked at as a Joburg boy, like very similar to some degree. I always those are my go-to stations generally. If I'm in Joburg, I'm listening to Kaya. If I'm in Cape Town, I listen to Heart for the most part. And but then moving to Jacaranda, which is a completely different shift compared to those two stations in particular.
Well, if you look at, it's a strange thing because, people in research and marketing would always want to segment these markets and go, that's black, that's white, that's colored, The SABC, when you look at what they're doing, it's their mandate to service language, race, etc.
Yeah.
But in the commercial sphere, when you look at the market research and the psychographics of these things, there's a lot of like similarities between the Cape Town R&B and soul market or jazz and Johannesburg. They may be different like musically, but in terms of radio and servicing those particular audiences, the mechanics, the kind of nuts and bolts are particularly the same. How you catch different people with different genres of music, or how you rotate music, how you position it on air, and then all the other related things like marketing, eventing. And when the internet came along, that gave us a whole new kind of palette of options on how to engage. And then I think generally, I don't care if you go to New Zealand or Australia, or you go to Gaborone, or you go to Accra, the basic foundations of radio are the same. It's a link between two sets of ideas,
Right.
The content and the audience. Something that you mentioned earlier about the background to all of this is once stations got privately owned, meaning there were greenfield stations like Kaya, Heart, Gagazi in Durban, Classic FM and YFM in Johannesburg. Jacaranda, East Coast, Algoa, all those stations were bought out the SABC and became commercial entities. And they were run by companies that were listed on the stock exchange. And that's how they raised their capital. And now they had to make these stations work. These stations really didn't make money. They'd made money before, but now the guys have got to pay back their loans. And so a whole new set of rules came into radio. And when you look at a station like Jacaranda, who were bought out of the SABC, who are part of the Kagiso stable now, highly successful station. If people had to look at the profitability of radio, it would actually give you whiplash. For the guys who understand a spreadsheet and what gross profit is, radio, if you get your costs under control and you run it effectively, can give you a gross profit of about 70 to 80%. And if you look at an operating profit after tax and you pay your loans and everything, you're looking between 45 and 55%. So radio, once you've got it set up and it's humming, they can be highly profitable entities. Jacaranda, going from working at 5FM and 702 and going to Jacaranda, it's weird. I grew up in an Afrikaans town on the West Rand, on a gold mining farming area. And so going to Jacaranda wasn't quite strange for me. The thing that was strange was kind of the Afrikaans music they were playing. Just in my head, I was more thinking left-wing Afrikaans music, whereas they were very much mainstream, but at the same time, there was a lot of stuff going on with Fok Polisiecar, and there was Hier was Fantasties going on, and there was some really kind of what the middle would think is kind of on the fringes, but actually I considered that kind of this stuff needs to be heard,
Right.
So there was a bit of a tussle between trying to drag Jacaranda out of that kind of mainstream, midstream thing and start exposing people. But now when you look at Jacaranda's concerts, I mean, those are the guys who are playing in the mainstream. They're doing their Jacker days, they're doing their unplugged,
Right.
and being surrounded by people like Martin Bester, who's been in the music industry. He's got his own like music career. Some people in the music department. It was quite exciting to see that station more from being what people would regard as pretty middle of the road to actually moving into new markets. And having to do that is not like an intervention that changes from one day to the other. It's like a gradual thing, It's
sorry to interject, but isn't that far more difficult when you're in a station that has a bottom line, so to speak?
So sales and programming have always had this relationship like this. And one of the things that's happened, I think, in our time in the last 25 years, since these stations have become these kind of economic powerhouses like for companies, is that programming people like myself need to think like salespeople and marketing people. So when you think of an idea, you've got to think potentially who the clients are, how you can monetize it, how you're going to promote it, how you're going to market it, what are the PR values, is there a CSI kind of angle to it. So you start thinking like a sales and marketing person. But in my experience, especially with the bigger stations who were doing 500-600 million rand a year, which is quite substantial revenue, is that salespeople, because one of the kind of underlying things in South African advertising is that everything in South Africa started nationally. So national radio, national agencies. Whereas in America, everything started at a local level and then built up to regional and then national. So we're sitting with a situation, and it's been broken down now. I mean, it has been, but at an advertising level, those advertisers just want to get national reach. They want to get into every corner of the country, Joburg, PE, Cape Town, Durban, and now you've got all these regional stations who are powerhouses like Jacaranda and KFM and Heart and Gagazi. Now media buyers and planners have got to kind of make their clients understand that. So salespeople have got to start thinking like programming people. Instead of having one station to go to, they've got to deal with 5 program managers or 6 program managers. Right. And each station's, they are subtly kind of different. So that national thing has kind of been broken down, I'm glad, into the regions and maybe even down to local radio. I mean, you look at the community radio sector. So ultimately, salespeople are beginning to think like programming people. And so the money, I would say, the margins are good, absolutely good. If you, I mean, this COVID thing has had quite a knock on people, probably 30 to 40% down on targets. And if a station has debt, to pay off, if you've got a loan, that's going to impact on the station. But some stations are debt free, so most of the money that comes to the front door goes straight to the bottom line. And if you're running a tight ship, it really is a good way to make money. Like if radios run properly, run leanly and effectively and economically, it's a good investment. Okay.
Into a couple of I suppose important questions in terms of South African radio. I mean, you've been involved in radio, as you say, for 40 years. I mean, how would you describe the state of radio now? And I mean, where would you say we're at in terms of local content? I can't remember when it was sort of changed or where it is. I don't even remember anymore. I don't know if it's 80-20 or 70, whatever the case may be. But I mean, I'd love you to comment on that and where we are in South Africa in terms of radio.
So in 1996, the IBA, which was then the Independent Broadcast Authority, was going to regulate radio. They'd also regulate frequencies for police and army and airlines and everything else, and radio and TV was part of their mandate. And they would license stations, as well as regulate around when stations apply for licenses, you get a thing called a Schedule D, and that your promises are performance, so it's local content. So when it started out, it was 25% local content. Okay. And there were 5 criteria for a South African song about composing, recording, etc. And you had to meet 3 of those 5 for it to be a South African song. Then the other thing, well, that's changed now, where commercial stations have a 35% like local content. I think the SABC by the end of next year have got to do 60%, and then the community stations have to do 60% as well, and 20% of that 60% for a community station has to be done locally, which, you know, if you're living in a rural area of Limpopo or the Eastern Cape or the Northern Cape,
Wow.
it's going to be pretty difficult to reach that 20% of local, of your 60%. And you know, I don't think too much thinking has gone into how that's going to be implemented or monitored or reported on, but I think that's the current like scenario. So then stations would also have things about news. You'd have a quota of news. You'd have to do 30 minutes of news a day. So much would have to be local. So much would have to be provincial. So much would have to be news that you do yourself, and international and national news. And then stations also have like things in their licenses about training and development. So the kind of the regime of compliance on your Schedule D is pretty big. I mean, every year you need to report to Casa on what you've done, if you've met the criteria, if you are compliant. And I know that commercial stations have the capacity to do this, whereas there are a lot of stations who don't actually meet those criteria at all. I've done a lot of training in the community radio area, and some of these stations, you know, some of them don't even have telephones because they can't afford to have a switchboard, and you know, so it's highly regulated. But in terms of local content, I think South Africa kind of got off to the wrong start. They expected that radio and television would play 25% local content, and this would be the panacea to all the problems of the music industry, which was absolutely pretty short-sighted because they didn't really research it properly. There've been models around the world, in Canada, in New Zealand and Australia, where it was called more of a 360 approach to local content, whereas stations would play 25%. They would make sure that venues, if it seated more than 150 people or had some kind of limit, that there'd have to be a stage and a certain amount of lighting and a certain amount of backline like equipment. So when bands went in, they didn't have to hire equipment, and there was a level of, you know, professionalism. And then there'd be a thing with the marketing trade, with retail, where they would rack and stack local content, and if a certain amount of local content wasn't sold, then there would be a rebate to that particular retailer. So if Tananas released an album and they printed 20,000 and they distributed across all their retail stores, and they only sold 10, then 10 would go back, but the store would, you still get a retail, or the record company would still get a rebate. So when you look at that, you're looking at the stuff on radio getting airplay and getting TV play, and then going to see live gigs, so that would be covered. And then, hey, I'm going to go to the store and buy the record. So it was more of a holistic way to approach the local content problem, which we never did. We thought that just playing like local music would fix our problem, and it really hasn't. But having said that, and then being part of, I mean, back to the early 1980s when I first came to Johannesburg, where, I mean, there were hundreds of music venues around like Johannesburg. I mean, on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you could go from, you know, Garincourt to Shoshongube to Atteridgeville. You could be in Melville. You could go into the middle of town. You could go into Soweto. You could go to Everton. There would be music everywhere. There'd be venues everywhere. And you just don't see that anymore. I mean, the live like music circuit is non-existent. I mean, as a music lover, there's nowhere to go to watch live music. There just isn't.
That's true. I mean, I know a lot of jazz musicians in Joburg, for example, were so happy when the Orbit, for example, opened up. And I remember initially, like, the Orbit was supposed to be almost exclusively jazz, but they realized that they then had to expand that to some degree. And I know even for me, as kind of like a soul jazz R&B funk artist to, you know, like I didn't have any venues I could perform at either. It was either rock or pop or jazz or whatever. So then the orbit kind of opened up that space for me. Once that closed down, it was, and I'm not suggesting that there's absolutely nothing, but it was very much like, what do we do now?
What do you do now? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think the other thing that comes in is that the musicians' unions or the kind of collectives that looked after like musicians really weren't doing their jobs. I mean, it started off with SONG, the South African Musicians Alliance. I think there are a couple of, there's one for roadies now. I mean, so there are communities that are looking after their self-interest, which is good. But I don't think there's the expertise and understanding, you know, the legal aspect, understanding how the market works, how all these things are working together. And, you know, the music industry or the entertainment industry in general is pretty much, you know, competitive. And I'm being nice when I say competitive. So you have all these like kind of the publishers are there, the musicians are there, the unions are there. Everyone wants their piece of the value chain, but there's no kind of coordinated, I don't know, it could be meetings, it could be alliances to get that supply chain like really humming so that the end user, which is the audience and the buyer, is getting the best possible experience. We're all just looking after our own portion and not like thinking around what's next in the chain, you know, which I find quite disconcerting because we've had enough time to think about this. There was a friend of mine in Cape Town, Rosie Katz, who started a thing called the MIDI Trust in the 90s. And part of their thinking was to get musicians and composers into workshops to make them understand contracts, recording contracts, publishing contracts, the legal side, you know, the general understanding of the foundations of the industry. Yeah. So, and I mean, it lasted about 10 years, I think, but then Rosie kind of moved on. And I haven't seen that kind of work being done when musicians come in. I mean, I got a call the other day from a muso around getting their SAMRO payments done and why they're not getting their royalties. And between SAMRO, who collect for composers, SAMPRO, who collect for mechanical rights, and now you've got Capasso. It is pretty daunting going through all the paperwork and the contracts and etc. And then under that, you still got the layers of publishers. So if you're not self-published and you're going through a publisher, that's another contract. You know, so I think that I mean, the two aspects of music that I found fascinating is the IP, and currently in Parliament you have the Copyright Amendment Act, which hasn't been amended since the 60s, and to make an amendment between the 60s and now, and all the bun fights that are going on. So the kind of IP and ownership and the legal issues around that versus the distribution channels, and we've spoken a lot about the distribution channels like recently, and that's a minefield. I mean, if you had to take the Apple iTunes T's and C's, you'd have to get a lawyer to actually go through it. And it would take a week to actually for him to get back to you. So are musicians, you know, kind of prep for this? I don't think so. I think Kwaito did a lot in terms of a lot of youngsters starting their own production companies and doing really, really well, but not realizing around their IP, the distribution deals with record companies, paying SARS was a big issue, you know. So once musicians get to that point where the money's coming in and there's a lot of events and, you know, TV's there and radio's there and sales are doing well, is once that money starts coming in, do you know you're getting the right cash? Are you paying tax? Are you compliant? There's a lot of things around that. And that's what the MIDI Trust try to start. But I really haven't seen anything post that's try to assist musicians get a good grounding in this type of stuff.
I mean, look, I think almost across the board, for some reason in South Africa, artists are often in their own little insular world, you know, and you kind of make decisions on your own. And then that just goes almost to every level, as you say. With the MIDI Trust thing, I know that, for example, every single time I do the Joy of Jazz festival, which the Standard Bank Joy, it's sponsored by Standard Bank. And A guy, a bass guitarist named Concord Nkapinde. He's
the
a
bass player, yeah, he's great.
brilliant player. He used to play for Johnny Clegg, incredible musician. He hosts something every year on behalf of Standard Bank where he brings in a couple of musicians. Standard Bank sponsor it, and you go out to various communities on the outskirts of Joburg, to various townships, Cosmo City. You could go to Soshanguve, as you say, various places, Soweto, and basically you run workshops. So they're doing their little thing. I know, for example, Martin Myers with MEX. Martin does certain things specifically for the Cape Town area, at least, Western Cape and Northern Cape. So there's small pockets of people doing it, but it's never like a one solid kind of union saying, this is what we need to do. Here's the mandate. Let's go and do it. And there are people who care, but even those people, it's small pockets. They're just like, well, I'm just going to do this by myself. If someone's not going to, if an organization, a bigger body is not going to be on board with this, someone needs to do this. Someone needs to transfer the skills. So I'm going to do it. And I think so many of us, look, I've been around. I mean, you've been in radio double the time I've been in the music industry. But for myself, once I got to like the 10-year mark, I decided I need to start spreading my knowledge as well. And it was so hard to find, as you say, like an umbrella body where you can just basically do this on a national basis. It was drips and drabs. So it was helping Concord with what he was doing with Standard Bank. It was helping Martin down in the Western and Eastern Cape, and those kind of things. But there just isn't one unified body going out and doing this.
Well, unions are there for a reason. It's because of people being exploited, artists being exploited. And it's not just the music industry, it's a general thing. And it's kind of strange because ultimately you've got to pay dues. And when you look at stronger unions like in the USA, Canada, Australia, maybe the UK and like in Europe, you can't move. Their rates set. Their standards set, their safety standards, We kind of did a thing in New York, a jazz tour recently with some like listeners, and they frequented a couple of clubs where we had taken two bands across. We were going to play in two clubs in New York. And obviously, the guys didn't do their homework, and you couldn't play without getting a license to play through the union in New York. And secondly, if you wanted to film the actual performance, you could only film 15 minutes of it. Those are union rules, because after 15 minutes, you've got to start paying people.
Wow. Oh.
So those unions have been around for a long time, and they represented their constituents or their members. And so those things are hard and fast. So when you look at that, there's a pension. I know that SAMRO do a pension fund, maybe some unions do, So those are the basic things, the healthcare, the pension funds, making sure that people aren't being ripped up by contracts and making sure that there's a rate card for playing.
I will say, to SAMRO's defense, I've had good chats with people at SAMRO and Capasso. There is a new bunch of people sort of who I would consider the face of these organizations, who are trying their level best to change that landscape and change the mindset and make sure artists aren't scared to approach them, who are happy to represent artists with legal disputes. It's usually the labels, for example, from a legal standpoint. Usually every entertainment lawyer in the country, and I'm not saying every single one, but the vast majority, they're employed by record labels. Now, and as an artist, it's very hard for me to get an expert in, let's say, entertainment law representing me when I can probably only afford to employ them for an hour. But like I say, there are definitely people now on the ground, particularly at SAMRO, Capasso, and SAMRO, who are willing to now step in, almost like a legal aid, so to speak, but they're willing to talk, they're willing to engage, they're willing to answer questions. I've tried it out for myself on a few occasions, particularly during lockdown. And I can tell you now, I always get a response. And in the past, it did seem like there was this absolute wall between these organizations and the artists. And that wall seems to some degree have come down. Have I lost you?
No, I agree with you. I think, I remember in the 80s visiting Samro, because there was an artist called James Phillips who I was playing, and they'd released only one album on Shifty, and I used to play it, and I don't know, I used to see him at gigs and that, and he said, well, I'm registered with Samro, but I've never seen a royalty check. And not that me playing is going to make him a millionaire, but he just was registered, but he wasn't getting any kind of feedback from Samro. So I used to keep all my compilations, all my PRS forms.
Right.
And then I took a whole bunch to Samro, and I went to speak to their collections art department. I met a lady there, and I mean, nothing was digitized in those days, and she went through the cards, and she put, this is the artist, and these are the songs that are registered. I said, well, here are the songs that I've played in the last 6 months, and obviously things are far more mature now, they're far more organized, but also in terms of the way that Samro is constituted, they are kind of, they do have, if you go to their website, you can look at their financials. People that are members can go to their board meetings. I can't speak for Sampra or Impra because I haven't really engaged with them at all, or even Casa. But I do think there is kind of a sense now that there's a bit more openness around how this works. I mean, radio stations do have contracts with people like Samra and Impra and Sampra, and we pay about 3.5% of gross income to Samra, and probably about 3.8% to Sampra, which is quite phenomenal. And the thing that I've always wondered was, how does this get distributed? Because we send our computer logs to those collection agencies, and they exact. So RJ, we played your song 120 times. In 2 months, you're going to know it's been played. And then how does that translate through the back end of Samro into payment? So when you get your statement, does it give you Kaya, Metro? Does it give you all the stations and how many plays you actually got? And then also the hierarchy in Samro is when you join at the bottom as a composer, you got 5 songs you join, but the more airplay you get and the more songs you put into the catalog, or the more songs you write that are represented, so your percentage of the pool kind of increases.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then the other thing is trying to find people that are registered, but you want to pay them, but they've gone missing, or you can't find them, or you haven't got their banking detail. And I haven't seen a lot of effort going into actually people running around and trying to find because that money will just sit in trust and do nothing. And I mean, with something that worries me about Sampra as well is they collect on mechanicals, so they own the master tape, and now a station will pay their money. 50% goes to the owner of the master tape, and the other 50% goes to the arranger and the producer and the engineer and the musicians who played on it. Now, to find someone who played triangle on a song in 1970 is pretty much impossible. To me, there's structural things here that kind of aren't, not that it's ever going to be perfect, but are they making the effort to make sure that the money that's been paid to them is actually going into the right places, and it's not just sitting in a trust account accruing interest?
I think it's such a good point. I mean, I didn't necessarily, for example, 2 years ago, I wasn't necessarily aware that Sampra were even paying this. I thought, I'll make my royalty income from Samra, and that's that. And I discovered through David Alexander that there were some unclaimed pieces of work of mine. And so I decided I'm just going to go into Sampra. And you're right, they don't have a system to track people down. They don't have somebody employed who's tracking people down. But having a chat with some of the people who work there, they say that the best way they can do this is through people like me, who work with so many of the session musicians in the country, so many of the mix engineers, and through guys like myself who are producers or writers, on top of being an artist, I've to some degree I've become like a honorary a recruiter of mix engineers, mastering engineers, the guy who recorded the album, the person who played the triangle on my one album, who I know has played triangle on many other albums. I've actually brought a lot of people in, and I will say this: if anything, lockdown has been a blessing in disguise for that, because so many artists who've lost their income stream, but probably have been sessioning for tons of musicians for decades, have suddenly cottoned onto this. And Sampra is almost inundated with people now sending the proof that they recorded on a song, etc., etc. And I wonder how badly they're snowed under. They're not recruiting, but I can tell you that there's a massive influx of session musicians and engineers and artists, backing vocalists, whatever it is, now suddenly registering with Sampra.
Well, I mean, a simple thing like a band playing a gig or a DJ playing a venue, and you're playing your own stuff, is the venue registered? Is the event organizer registered? Are they doing the returns? Are they doing the set? Your kind of PRS for your set, and are they sending it to Sampra? Because every time Sampra gets a sheet, it's going to take you up the ladder, be it airplay, be it eventing, be it a gig, be it an event. I mean, all these things count. So musicians are notorious for not liking admin, but there's got to be, like we said earlier, some kind of support or someone in the band or someone in the management that gets this stuff done. It's pivotal. And I mean, now getting into digital, it's even, because we do this by territory. I mean, publishing and all that, isn't. We do it by territory. So every territory you go to has got a different deal. There's different copyright law. There's different things about IP. Yeah. It does become really important that there's the administration of it, like it's looked after. And I think there's too few people in power in South Africa that do all that stuff well. And that, I mean, I'm not saying they're ripping people off, but the more people that get involved in the administration in the back end, of the stuff, to rights of musos and their content, well, that to me is kind of the pinnacle of it, is that when a muso goes on stage, he's there to perform. He doesn't have to worry about the bank, the PRS, Sampra. It's all taken care of, and they're there to perform.
Which should be the absolute bottom line for musicians. Look, hopefully we'll get there. I mean, I think it's discussions like this and other discussions, at a conference like MEX, that are trying to, I suppose, get to the bottom of this. We're hoping that young musicians are watching and learning, and from here going on to Google and starting to research, and possibly build their careers like it's a business, as opposed to, I just want to make my songs, because, yeah.
Well, it's pretty much the same with radio. When prospective presenters send you their demo, it's just about being on air. It's like, hey, baby, give me a call. I'll play you a tune. Kind of thing, And the same for musos, but there's this whole machine behind you that pays for the studio, for the tech, that puts you on air, that sends you to the transmitter, that does the marketing so people are aware of what the station is and who they are. There's this whole machine, and that's the whole thing, is when guys come in at just a young age, it shouldn't be taken away from their natural passion for what they want to do. They really do need to understand about what's going on in the background. So we spoke earlier about playlisting and stuff. So guys come to drop off their CDs or their songs for playlisting. Stations need to explain to them how the playlisting system works. Record companies and established production companies pretty much know, because they deal with all the major radio brands like all the time. But when it gets to smaller production companies or individual artists, or managers even, because a lot of artists don't have labels, that they just
especially now.
It's understanding the process of when you put your song into a system and how that system works. Because a lot of them would return you back and say, I haven't got feedback about my song. And then you'd go to the music department and crap all over them and go, if I've told you once, I've told you 100 times. You've got to give feedback to these guys. And this is all about reputation. And not every song can go on the radio. I mean, a lot of stations who run tight ships, I mean, at Jacaranda, guess how many songs on their total playlist, current and oldies? Give me a number.
Sure. 2,000?
468.
No way.
Wow. So that's really tight. There are stations, and Kaya's like one of them, who have 2,000, which is big. I mean, the United States, guys are playing 200 songs. So the whole thing is, your current stuff is being rotated highly. So your new songs are being played 45 times a day. Yeah. Your oldies are being played probably once every 2 days, right? So if artists are bringing their stuff for being on the playlist, there's only, say, in new music, there'd be 30 places on the playlist for new music. So if those 30 places are full, you've got a pile of CDs like next to your desk waiting to get into those 30. So you do your music research, you find which songs are going up, you find which songs are going down. The ones that are going down, you'll take off the playlist at maybe 2 every 2 weeks. So there's only really 2 places available for 2 new songs. So now you've got 30 songs next to you. Which 2 are you going to put on, and which are best for the sound of the station? And especially if they're new artists, you kind of like got to hedge your bets on new artists. Some stations like Kaya are really good at that, because they'll go, and they broke Lera. They said, this is an artist we are going to support. So that album came out, she was used on events, she was on air all the time, she was interviewed. We used her at events. So there was really a 360 on really supporting Lera and giving her all the support that she needed. And we've done that with a lot of other artists. When artists come to a radio station, and radio stations are running these tight playlists, because you're spending R1 million a year just doing call-out like research on a weekly basis, like taking your top 20 current songs and going to your audience, like, don't like, play too much, don't know, stop playing it, and understanding the profile of the audience and who you're attracting. And that would determine pretty much how songs go into a playlist or leave it. And I think it's pretty much like the record industry as well. You could have 20 Mariah Careys, and they all sound great. They're great songwriters. They're great performers. But you can only choose one. There can only be, which Mariah Carey is it going to be? And the same for playlisting. You can have all these great artists, but you can't just put everything on the playlist. There's got to be what we call clocks and rotations. So each hour of the day has a clock, and in that clock is like playlists are broken down into A's, which are your best songs. They're the songs you're playing 4 to 5 times a day. B's you're playing 2 to 3 times a day. C is like the new artist. You're playing 1 to 2 a day. There's a category called recurrence, which are songs that were in A that are now going to be rotated at a low rotation. They're still popular, but you're going to slow down the rotation because you don't want to burn them too much. And then there's the oldies catalog, which you can break up into genres or eras or pieces of eras, etc. So that to try to get on a playlist, to get into those clocks to be rotated, is like really, really important.
Right. I mean, look, this definitely for me kind of moves into that. Look, there's a lot of competition with artists, and whether that's labels or independents, we keep hearing about payola. I personally have experienced it. I even know that there have been certain people who've been caught out and sued for these things. But I think, I mean, what would you say to an independent artist watching this in terms of, well, I suppose the basic question is there such a thing as payola? What exactly constitutes payola? But then at the same time, is there a way to stop it? And what should I do in spite of something like payola?
I think the question is, why hasn't the SABC addressed it? People have been fired from the SABC, but there's never been an entire kind of internal investigation. And this doesn't just happen at the SABC. This happens at community radio level. It happens at commercial radio level. But it's quite sophisticated. In the old days, it was just a brown envelope. People would just give you money in an envelope. Then it got to, we'll take you on an overseas trip to see your favorite artist. They're playing in New York, or they're playing in London, or they're playing in France. We'll put you on a plane. Then it got to, we'll buy you a car, you know. Then it got to the swimming pool or whatever. Now, to prove that, you know, in terms of money and all that, it's pretty difficult, like, to prove legally. But then it got to the sophistication where one record company or one production company would pay payola not to play their direct competing artist. So I'll give you this if you don't play that artist on your playlist.
Yeah.
And then it's even iterated even further now, where instead of going through all that stuff I've just mentioned, is, dude, I'll just give you a co-composing right. So register with SAMRA, and I'll give you a co-composing right. You get 30% of it or 20% of it. And then, like, who can prove that you haven't written the song with me? No one. We had a meeting, we had a couple of beers, we sang a song, I wrote it, you co-composed it, you added some ideas. And I mean, you know, as a writer, if you co-composing, those deals are done. You know, you're going to get a split. And then with, you know, sampling and everything else, I mean, nowadays when you look at, like, record inners, like the inner sleeve, there's like 6 or 7 composers, like in a song, as opposed to the old days where the maximum of 4, maximum, you know.
Yeah.
So this payola thing exists, and it's become very, very sophisticated. And on the flip side of that, RJ, is in America, when you look at stations or networks like iHeart, and now even on Spotify and Pandora and all the other streaming services, a lot of record companies are promoting artists, or they're paying them to go, hey, here, play this artist, put it on your screen, we'll do ads, we'll do a deal with you. I mean, that kind of falls into that payola thing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there was a case we spoke about Mariah Carey. She released an album probably 10, 15 years ago, and they went to one radio network and they said, we'll pay you X amount of money to debut the song on all your breakfast shows across across all your stations at the same time on the same day. And they did it. And that kind of changed the view about pay for play. You know, I think payola is pretty much either starting with a disc jockey, a DJ or like a presenter, where there's no control of the music, because the music systems in radio, I can tell if a DJ hasn't played a song or played a song, because there's so many checks and balances digitally, the way the back end works in music scheduling. But so it's gone from the DJ to the music compiler or the music manager now. So they manage those systems. Now, myself as a program manager, I've got insight and oversight on the back end as well. So I can see what the music manager is doing. I can see what the presenter's doing, like in the studio. So there's line of sight of that. So, you know, so there are checks and balances, but ideally, if there's no control, and I know there are a lot of stations that are pretty loose and fast, like with this stuff, payola is pretty easy. It's pretty easy, like, to do, especially if DJs are playing their own choice. If the music manager's into it, or the music compilers are into it. And it's a real thing. It really hasn't been dealt with. And, you know, under the circumstances, politically, socially, that we have been brought up in, like in this country, you know, I think there are roots on this thing to what's right and wrong, but there are kind of side routes around what's happened socially and politically around how this thing has been worked in the past.
I mean, you know, there's a lot of artists who, I mean, I speak to every now and then when they ask me the question, and some artists will turn around and say, "Well, I'm going to do it then," which is, I mean, it's hard to argue for or against it. I just kind of put up my hands and go, "It's not my policy. I don't agree with it personally. You need to do what you need to do. I have no idea how it works. I don't know the system. But if you want to do it, you're on your own, you know." But I mean, it's hard to to discourage an independent artist or a new young artist when they see that that's how the game is being played, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. Look, I think you're not going to get rid of it totally, but I think if artists and production companies and record companies came to stations with a better offering, it's not just, well, here's the CD or here's the track or, here it is on a stick, download it, whatever. If there was a more thoughtful marketing, PR, integrated process about, okay, this is the artist, this is who they are. One of the things that I've always said to music managers is never let the record company or the artist play you the song in the office, because then they put you in a position where they can make you say, do you like it or not? And the moment you go, hey, it's a cool song, then when it doesn't get on the playlist, they go, hey, but you said you liked it. So you're putting yourself into a situation. So ultimately, when artists, production companies, music companies go in, it's not just here's the content, the song. There's a story behind it. This is the person, if they're not an established artist, if they're a new artist, where's the video? Where's some interesting bits on video or audio that stations can use? So if I am going to playlist it, I've got an interview, I've got some video, I've got some stills, I can do something online, I can do something on Twitter and Facebook if they've got an Instagram account, so there's a whole lot of content that can be curated around that stuff to create a bigger story around an artist, a song, a meme, graphics. All these things are really important. So when it's not just here's the bar, here's the song, and then you walk away. There's a far more integrated approach, because if you're going to be stuck in that 30 on the right hand side waiting for 2 or 3 to come through to fall off the playlist, I'm going to be more kind of suited to an artist that has come here, engaged with me, told me their story, what the music's about, why they're doing it, I got this and I sampled this and I used this music for that. It's going to make me think twice about what's going to go, or make me think deeper about what's going to go onto the playlist. There was a great story about Trevor Rabin. He had lived in the UK for a long time and did solo albums, but when he went to America, he got signed up, and he said the most important thing in America when you released an album was going to all the markets. So he was a rock player in those days. Is going to Boston, New York, LA, Cleveland, going to all the Chicago, going to all the big cities that were rock based, and going to the rock stations and seeing the rock program manager and seeing the rock music manager. So those were really important. I mean, in America, it's like a large market, but pretty much if you do it as a microcosm here, I just get an email, and every single station has been CC'd.
That's
and then
exactly
it's the trick. I'm sorry, it's just not good enough, But
that's
here,
such a good point, man.
Yeah, it's these things are relationships. I mean, we have relationships with record companies. We have relationships with production companies. We have relationships with artists. I mean, Kai used to do a lot of eventing, a lot of unplugs, a lot of things around music, like podcasts and documentaries and stuff. And for us to then come to an artist and go, hey, can you do this on Friday, or can you help us out on the weekend? The answer would always be yes. So these relationship things are really, really important. I mean, there are quite a few examples where we've taken artists, especially with the jazz stuff, and started like a digital jazz stream on the website. So you can't play them on air, but you can promote them on air and say they've been played on Jazzery FM. Go to the website, click on the stream, and that's a secondary channel, and then use them on the Unplugged, use them on Kai TV, use them for events. I mean, we've done like arts things with art galleries, and you invite the band to come and play, etc. So a lot of ways, besides just being on the playlist, there are other ways to get your stuff into the radio thing. But with the segmentation of the market happening so relentlessly with digital and so many other players coming in, I mean, this TikTok thing, I still don't understand it, but I was exposed to a very good friend of mine's son on the weekend who came around for a braai, and he's 11, and he was just showing me stuff on TikTok, and it's all music. It's all music, and it's 60 seconds. Yes. So, I mean, what kind of impact does that have? I don't quite understand it or know, but I know they've got 100 million followers or subscribers, So it's horses for courses. Radio is still an important thing. No matter what research you've seen in developed or the, not third world, but the developed world and the developing world, is that radio is still the primary source for finding new artists. And Spotify have been absolutely aggressive in this area about promoting artists, about promoting new bands, promoting new music. I mean, you can go to their site. There's little icons you can check on. You can search for it. But the majority of radio listeners still find new music on the radio.
Yeah, I can believe that. I mean, look, I certainly know that's the case in South Africa. I know as a artist now, almost 20 years in, radio is pivotal to any new release that I put out. It's absolutely pivotal. I know there are certain key stations that's been streamlined as I've gone on. I think younger artists, to what you were talking about a few minutes ago, younger artists sometimes just want an umbrella. In other words, they just want to sample everyone. It's like a gamble. And then, if they've sampled 130 stations, then maybe 30 or 50 or 100 will playlist them, but they'd rather take the gamble. And I think to some degree that's where pluggers come in, especially for independent artists, because a lot of the packages that you get when you go to a plugger is, do you want me to do targeted kind of playlisting, or do you want me to playlist everyone? The fee is different, and that's just become a new lucrative sort of side of the business. There's a lot of let's say pluggers who were sampling for labels who have now taken on that work. In my experience, there are some pluggers who are like snake oil salesmen, who really sell themselves well, and they literally are just anyone, and they're just like, I'm a radio plugger, and now suddenly they've got clients. I mean, as someone who's been so involved in radio, I mean, would you recommend to an independent artist to outsource someone like a plugger, or rather do this independently? Where do you stand on pluggers?
Pluggers only started happening here in like the 1990s. I mean, before that, the record industry was pretty much tied up. There were 4 major labels with their sub-labels within their labels that they like represented. Then each sub-label would have a rep, and that rep would be there on a Tuesday with the new artist, with the new samples. But in the 90s, things started to change when record companies like outsourced that to pluggers. And there are a lot of good pluggers, like you say. And they also, I mean, in America, because it's such a vast thing, record companies didn't have the capacity to have a plugger in every major city in the top 100 markets. So they used pluggers. And that's how payola started as well, was these pluggers would pay DJs to play stuff. So pluggers have got a really bad rep in America. There are definitely above the line legit pluggers. In fact, I saw something on the internet the other day about a local company with a rate card going, for 750 you get that, for 1,200 you get that, So there are guys out there. I would say, I mean, when the pluggers come in, they've got to be passionate about their product. It's a sales pitch, So you are at arm's length from the record company. So you're a middleman between the record company and the distribution, the radio kind of airplay, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it is, and I don't want to mention names because there are a lot of people who do this really well, and they make a good living out of it, and they're quite successful out of it. And not just here, but I know friends in Australia and New Zealand who do this like for a living. But going back to that relationship thing, I think having a plugger, if they understand the music industry and understand radio targeting specifically, and because our market has segmented as well. In the old days, there was 5 FM, and there was Metro, and there was 702, and there was Capital. That was it. Now, there's 120, 140 stations, plus there's TV, plus there's online now, plus there's, satellite TV. So those jobs have become far more kind of complex, and there's a lot more places to go. But like you say, if you target it, you can't just do a blanket email. Let's go, I want to go there, I want to go there. These are the most influential stations. If you look at, if you understand their audiences, I mean, all that information is available. You can go to research sites and find stations. All their details are there around their audience penetration, the age groups they attract, the race, the loyalty to, like, there's a load of demographic and psychographic data. So people can learn about the stations or know about the stations before they go in. So you're not just trying to do the shotgun approach and shoot and hope something sticks. You know, you have to, like you say, you going in there with a specific purpose. You know,
right.
The pluggers aren't there, but it's not a bad thing. It's how they do it.
Right. And I suppose we're in the age of information in a big way. All that information is generally freely available. It's just you got to jump into the Google and you know, spend a bit of time on there, man.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, carry on.
Well, I was going to suggest, like, let's maybe just wrap up, but I think finish this thought and then we'll end off.
Yeah, you know, with the data thing, you know, one of my first jobs in radio was phoning up 20 people on the telephone and going, do you want to be part of a music survey? And then the cassette player would be next to me and it had the hook, a 10-second hook of 10 songs. And then you would get the responses from 10 people, and you do that like 4 times in a week. And that gave you a kind of guide as to what was popular to what you were playing. I mean, now with the amounts of data that are available, if websites are set up properly, you know, if your social media is set up properly, you've got some kind of psychographic like research. I'm talking about radio now, and you're doing market research, and you've got what they call RAMs, the Radio Audience Measuring Survey, which most stations subscribe to. That amount of data, I mean, now you need like a data analyst to come in, because even as a program manager, you can't keep up with all this data. So people in digital will get their figures. People who do RAMs and audience segmentation and do the market research. And you need a data analyst now to take all this data and put it into some kind of data set that can be used, which is so much data. I mean, you could cut and paste this stuff, divvy it up in certain ways. I mean, you can make shit smell like Chanel with data. I've seen it happen, you know. But that's and I think that's becoming more and more important. I mean, I'm quite a security and privacy freak on the internet, and we know why. But ultimately, people give away too much of their own data, you know. But like you say, there's so much data out there, and credible data, not just like rubbish. I mean, you could see rubbish like for what it is, but ultimately, it is. I mean, they're calling it the data's the new oil. It's like the grease of the cogs of industry, and I see it every day, not just in my job, but everywhere. How important this data thing is becoming. I mean, when you release a song internationally, you get that is it called the CR code?
ISRC code, yeah.
I've said, yeah. So that stuff is monitorable, you know, like across the globe, and that's data.
Absolutely. I suppose what they term metadata. So
yeah, metadata. Yeah,
absolutely, man. I think let's end this off. And it's a fairly broad question, but you've been around radio for 4 decades. I think we could possibly say even 5 decades now. I mean, where do you see South African radio in particular going from where it is? What's the next sort of evolution? Are we talking podcasts, or is that for the digital medium alone? And sort of, I mean, you know, where we've got so many different mediums of radio in South Africa, you know, from community stations to commercial stations to the SABC. So, I mean, as someone who's been around for this long, you know, I mean, where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I'm a bit old school in my thinking around this. You know, I mean, after the written word and the telegraph, radio was the third communication like invention. You know, word of mouth, writing, print, telegraph, radio. It's 100 years old. 85% of the world's population listen to the radio every day. It differs in countries on how much. In South Africa, time spent listening to radio is about, I think it averages between 2.5 and 3 hours a day for 85% of the population, which is massive. I mean, wow. Time spent listening in certain parts of the world is 40 minutes a day. So here, radio is still really important. And I think, you know, when you look at Telkom and you look at Casa, the regulator, and you look at all the cell phone companies and you look at all, I mean, the data stuff and the way people connect. Thank God, you know, Telkom and Casa have done such a bad job.
Yeah.
Because they've had barriers to entry. I mean, data's too expensive, handsets are too expensive, and if you really want to make this ubiquitous, it's not just middle class and upper middle class and rich people buying iPhones and the technology that you can stream. Now you've got the data prices. I mean, there's been this whole thing in Parliament about data prices and the fights between the cell phone operators and Casa. So those have been barriers. I think radio will be around in its you know, radio is about putting out. It does two things. It's an intimate relationship between a brand, a station, their personalities, their music, their offerings, what they do, their news, their sport, and the listener, the people who find affinity with their particular brand. And when you listen to the streaming guys, streaming have got now, they're doing sport, they're doing weather, they're doing podcasts, because now the human voice is there. So the streamers understood in a very short space of time that you can't just be playing song for song and, you know, think it's your iPod, because there's no kind of human element like in it. So I think South African radio in particular has still got like legs, and I think digital's been a great compliment to us because it's given us far more. I can take a piece of like content and go, that's more video rich, that's more audio rich, that's more text and pic rich, so that goes on social media, that'll go on the website, and I can use on air to promote it like video. But if there's a strong thing on audio, meaning radio, I can promote it online with social, with the website, like etc. So that kind of digital thing has given us a whole new set of tools to work with. And I think if you look at generally the most successful stations, I mean, there's a guy on Kaya called Skumba, and he does Friday mornings. He's a comedian. I mean, that guy's got on Kaya's YouTube channels, got like 20 million downloads. 20 million.
Sure.
I mean,
wow.
And there's no music involved here. This is just taking a piss and doing comedy on a Friday morning, you know. So stations do have the ability, if they manage their personalities and their content and they curate it correctly, that it's going to live on air and online. So I think radio still got legs terrestrially. With DAB coming, what they call digital audio broadcasting, which is like big in Australia and New Zealand. There you can have multiple channels. So if it was Kaya, you could have a Kaya channel, you could have a jazz channel, you could have an R&B channel, you could have a soul channel. So you could do a lot of that on DAB, plus pop-up stuff, plus your social media. So you could really get funky with it. But DAB, I think, is still a long way off here, because it's like you've got to get people to buy receivers, they've got to put in the infrastructure, the transmitters, so it's going to take a while. But generally, FM terrestrial combined and complemented with digital is great, because we can do our own streaming stuff. I mean, you could, I know that East Coast Radio and I think a couple of others have started, and Jacaranda have started their own streaming channels, like 80s and 90s hits, and I know that Barney Simon does some stuff. So really on digital, you can complement what you're doing, and you can use your on-air and your digital platforms to promote the hell out of that stuff. So I think radio's still got legs. I think the biggest thing is that Facebook and Google and, you know, like the big five have come in and eaten everyone's breakfast, and everyone in the advertising fraternity and the marketing fraternity, because digital tends to be a lot cheaper nasty. They're stealing our breakfast, and radio's got to find ways to get that breakfast back. And I'm not just saying through digital appeal, but also through making radio more exciting. We went through the 90s where it was, hey, here's another 40 minutes of uninterrupted music, you know, and the jock did time and temperature, and that was and that's actually destroyed the connection between presenters and their audiences, as they were just like these class monitors. They really didn't do anything. Now suddenly digital arrives, and you're up against everyone who's got a YouTube channel and everyone who's famous on Instagram. So now stations are going to have a new approach to how you look at what shows are, what they represent, who they are. And that makes it more difficult for, you know, younger people to get in, or new people, because it's like a football team. I've got 11 people on the field, and there's 11, and I've got to get the best 11. I've got to have a striker, attacking midfield, good defense, and for youngsters and new people to get into that, it's like the playlist thing again. It's really difficult. And one of radio's most dangerous thing is we're not developing new talent. You're not fine. We're just rotating same old jocks, goes from here to there to there to there, and we're not really using our time and effort and data to actually take people, new people, give them new ideas, and let them loose on the radio, which can translate into digital like content, like as well.
I mean, dare I say that, like, I mean, given what you're saying, it almost feels like some of the new talent that will I assume soon come into South African radio will probably be coming from a lot of these other places, from YouTube or Instagram, or because
there's a big debate.
To some degree, that it's auditions.
There's a big debate about that in radio, and one side would go, "We want radio people who get it." Then there's another side who go, "We want Samizi, who's not a radio guy. We want Samizi, or you want someone who's got 3 million followers on YouTube, or whatever the case is." I mean, the thing about followers versus engagement is a different thing on social media, but so there is this kind of debate going on in radio around using non-radio people for radio. I've worked with probably a half a dozen, and if you give enough training and support and guidance, it's doable. It really is. Okay. I've seen people flourish, it's like something new, and it's great having someone with natural curiosity to go into the air, kind of not understanding the medium yet and whatever, and seeing how they react when the red light goes on, when the mic goes on, to make their own particular type of magic. And I've seen some incredible stuff being done where people are kind of unaware of their innate ability in relating things to people. So it's like you and I talking here, we can see each other, but obviously radio, you don't see anyone. But when that mic goes on, it's almost like they're talking to their chance, and that's what you want, Yeah. So they are given development and guidance. I think these things are transferable. In terms of podcasts, etc., I love podcasts. I mean, I consume them a lot. But podcast is just like radio. It's segmented, or just like music. I like more storytelling podcasts that I can listen to a 3-part series or a 4-part series, whereas other people just want, cheap and nasty 10-minute, tell me how to get a cheap second-hand car, or how do I manage my bank account. Other people want personality interviews and celeb stuff. So it depends on what you want. But there's over, oh heavens, I think on Apple and Amazon, Spotify are doing it now, there must be 10, 20 million podcasts out there at the moment. That's a lot. It's a lot. And also, producing podcasts, people must understand that a podcast isn't just something you've done on air and then you've taken the audio and put it on. That's not a podcast. That's like a rebroadcast. A podcast is something with, you could do an interview podcast, you and I doing an interview, etc. Yeah. It could be multiple voices interviews. It could be a documentary style where I go out and I interview 10 people, come back with a storyline, edit it down, put music to it, put effects to it, and it becomes like a documentary. So this podcast thing, it's multi kind of leveled, but it depends how you use it. I mean, I like the more kind of, current affairs, politics, like type of stuff. But when they've done research, you can definitely see the differences in what's really popular. And I mean, Joe Rogan just signed to Spotify for like $300 million. That's incredible money. And that's just podcasting. That's just like video and audio. So the same thing applies, RJ, is like, can you get that celebrity on there? I mean, Skumba, like I said, an example, he's on Kai TV like every Friday morning. You look at the YouTube channel, 20 million views. That's massive. It's massive. So radio users can use these things to its advantage. And I think, being in the southern tip of Africa, there's a whole lot of interesting stuff happening north of us and east of us and west of us and in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's one of the things we actually ignore here is looking at other parts of Africa. I mean, trying to get South Africans to think about Africa is pretty difficult. I mean, the staff are just thinking about Joburg, or if they work in Cape Town, they're not thinking about what's happening in Zim, or exciting business things that are happening in, Mozambique, or, politically, and also artistically, musically, and entertainment. Like this Afrobeat, you hardly hear any Afrobeat in South Africa, like on the radio. You're not hearing the Kenyan stuff. You're not hearing the Nigerian stuff, the stuff that's coming out of Ghana. These people are like international artists as well,
Yeah.
But this link to Africa is something that radio should be doing a lot more of. It's in our own interest, actually.
I mean, I suppose with all that said, it's quite incredible how powerful then South African radio still is. Because it sounds like there is just so much room to grow. So I don't think, radio in South Africa is going away in the foreseeable future at all.
Yeah, they say it's an attention economy. You have the younger demographic who obviously want short, snappier, more compact things done. So if you are a youth station, you can't be sitting down and talking, about a particular subject for a whole hour with a boring guest. You'd rather get like 5 people in, record them, like take out the most outrageous, great, laughable, important things, package it and say, here it is on air. If you want to listen to the full interview, go to the website or go to our app or whatever. So this kind of thing of how you look at dealing with your audiences. I mean, you can look at talk shows across 702. You can look at talk shows across RSG, SAFM. It's just these long-winded, hour-long conversations with people. And if you're not interested in that particular subject, you're gone. You're gone. So it's programmers understanding their audiences and the latency for talk, especially because talk and music audiences is a definite difference. So when you do talk, you better do it well and be well produced and like well resourced to make sure that there are online elements. But with music, it's a younger audience and it's easier to do because if you do your research and you do your homework and you're eventing and you're promoting and you're making it exciting and thinking about it. I mean, one of the things I really miss on the radio is hearing retro shows about what happened in 92, what happened in 96, because people live their lives like that. And today, like, you don't hear many jocks like playing all these and going, hey, I've got 3 in a row from 1996, or, I've got an old interview that I did with Ray Peary. It's the anniversary of his death the other day. We're going to be doing an hour on Ray Peary. I just don't see that anymore. It's just, people like, it's weird. I demand more because I'm a radio person and I want to be engaged more. You can't just play me song for song, go, hey, what's up? How you doing? Send me a shout out, send me a voice note. I'll come back after the commercials. Just like, yeah, please. Next station. And I think that programmers need to put a lot more emphasis on quality. If you put on the radio, you can hear a lot of presenters on thinking about their content, their links. They're just putting on the mic and just flying by the seat of their pants. It's like, hey, buddy, this is not a jam session. Like you got to put some thought into these links and how you connect them. Because every time you're in the mic, you've got an opportunity to change something. Make a person laugh, make a person think about their own value system. Someone to go, oh my God, never thought like that before. I didn't know about that. So radio is like a takeaway. Every time a person comes to your station, they got to leave with something, going, that was good. I disagree with that person, but I see their point of view. So there's the kind of mechanism that radio is for change in society, I think is really important. And when people get an on-air show or a responsibility to do news or sport or whatever, you better take this goddamn seriously. It's not just about fame and fortune. Is that every time you put on the microphone to do your particular thing on air, there's a chance to have an effect in society. And we all know that we grew up with radio, although it was limited and state-run. Now, there's quite a plethora of choice, like on the dial. But how we felt about radio and why I got into radio, why I got excited about it, So ultimately, radio stations need to spend more time on the on-air stuff as opposed to just the marketing and the sales.
Sure, man. Like I think, if anything, this discussion we've had just shows me how much passion you still have for this industry, and for the medium of radio. So I suppose in closing, I just want to say I really hope, to see you still being influential in radio. It's very clear that you have some incredible insights, knowledge, and thought on radio, not just in South Africa. So, I suppose, look, on behalf of myself and the MEX team, and on behalf of MEX 10, that's really awesome. The amount of knowledge you've given us in now what's been well over an hour. I know we were talking a little bit less than that, but this has been incredible, man. I mean, look, from myself, I just wish you all the best. I hope you're going on to big and bright things. And just thanks again, man.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. It's been cool talking to you.
Music has changed. How it makes us feel never will. The time is now to visit ampstudios.co.za.